Hi David,
Hi.
nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I wanna ask you, what is sonification and what is it for?
Sonification is the use of sound for realizing an idea. We use the word both as a noun, which is like sonification, music or visual art or something. It's the object that comes out of the process of sonifying. So sonifying is the act of sonifying, the act of making a sonification. So we need to be sure when we're talking that we understand that we're using it as a verb or a noun. So when you say what is it for, I assume you mean it as the noun. In other words, what is the object used for? Well, I think the reason that we use the word sonification is because we're using sound, the making of sound, in order to understand something, which is better understood if we make the idea in sound than if we make it some other way, or at least as equally. It comes very simply from the idea that we have ears that hear and we have eyes that see, and they are different. We perceive the world differently with our eyes than with our ears. If we didn't, if our eyes did the same thing as our ears do, if our ears functioned in exactly the same way as our eyes, we wouldn't need four, we would just get rid of some of them. So that tells you that biologically we do different things with our ears than our eyes. So when we come to understanding structure in the world, in data, or whatever it is we're dealing with, we can use our ears to understand something about it which is different to what we can understand with our eyes.
So David, which role plays the physiologic reception abilities of the human acoustic system?
Well, the first thing to understand, I think, is that the ear analyzes frequency incredibly well and very quickly and with no effort. It's not a brain function, it's the organ itself. The organ itself, with the cochlea, acts as we would say in scientific terms, a Fourier analyzer. So it splits all the frequencies up and allows the brain to understand all sorts of frequencies simultaneously. The second thing that happens is that it's incredibly sensitive to time. So while you can imagine if you're watching a movie, the frames are going past at 25, 30 maybe frames every second, and you see continuous movement. When it comes to the ear, our resolution, our ability to detect one sound following another is in the order of 10 milliseconds. So this is an order of magnitude greater. So this means that when we're trying to detect whether this occurred first or that occurred first, very hard with the eye. Often very difficult with the eye. But with the ear you can tell immediately that this happened then and this happened. So the ability to understand timing structure, the ability to, we say, integrate across time is incredibly superior. The ear is the incredibly superior organ for that activity. Then you have the ability to hear many things simultaneously. We can hear slightly in the background, for example, the hum of a loudspeaker. We can hear the sound of the lights. You can hear the sound of my voice. If someone else speaks, you hear the sound of their voice. All of that's going on simultaneously. And through the hearing system, we don't confuse them. We hear them all separately. In fact, if you think about it, you can listen to a whole symphony orchestra with 100 players, and if you listen carefully, you can hear the third violinist play just by drawing your attention to it through your hearing. So that's the third aspect. The fourth aspect is that unlike the eyes, we don't have earlids. In eyelids, we have eyelids. We can close our eyes and you don't exist. Where are you? But if you speak, no matter whether I close my eyes or not, I don't have lids on my ears to stop me hearing you. And this is a very specific thing with hearing. That means that if there's a tiger behind me in the jungle, that I can hear the tiger coming without even seeing the tiger. And this is particularly the case. This is an evolutionary thing. So our ears tell us a lot. Our ears lead our eyes. In very much from a biological point of view. Our attention is drawn by our ears and then we observe. So you can solve just a couple of examples to show you that it's a very different, physiologically, psychophysiologically, it's a very different sense.
What could be examples for useful specific applications?
Of sonification.
Yeah.
The field is quite broad. There are many different applications depending on what it is you're trying to do, very different types of sonification. So there are alerts and alarms, things for warning you about something. There's a lot of use for people who can't see, of course, for navigation, for example. Or if in a fire situation, if you're in a fire and the fireman can't find people, but they could follow sound. But the area that we're working with here is slightly different and a bit more complex, which is to try and build models of what it is that we're wanting to sonify. To make a model in sound, so that the sound functions like it's a sound. So like it's a sound that's made in the real world, but it's made with the data from the thing that we're sonifying. So you get some metaphor, some model of what it is that we're sonifying. What it is we're interested in finding out something about through sonification.
And for the project here at Fraunhofer IRS, where comes the data from?
The data is from the network, the computer network. So all the computers in Fraunhofer, both here at IRS in Erlangen, but also all over, are connected together as in a network. And that network is connected to other networks, like the internet. So we have an internet and an intranet, which is the data just here, and data is flowing around this network as we communicate with each other, as we send each other email, as we send data to the printer, as we send data to the satellite, and so forth and so on. All this data is flowing and it's going through switches. The data flows in little packets, just like in a post office. And these packets are flowing through switches and being redirected, just like the mail system. And so what we are doing here is we have a tool which every now and again grabs a packet and says, oh, let's look at the address of that packet. Oh, it's going there. And then we grab another one. And then we grab another one. And then we count how many packets are going through the system. So we get some sense of the rate of flow of the data. And we can then tell by saying where it's come from and where it's going to, we can build a statistical model it is, because we're not looking at every packet. It's impossible, there's too many packets, there's gigabytes and gigabytes of packets flowing all the time. You can't look at them all, you can't observe them all. So we're choosing, we're developing a tool, if you like, to pick and choose the packets. So the data comes from Fraunhofer, but it comes through the system and we are looking at it through the system.
And I'm sure there's a lot of data flow, isn't it?
Huge amount of data flow. You need to talk to the IT, far too much for you to hear every packet. So we are sampling something like one packet every 2,000 packets as the maximum. And even then we can't hear, couldn't possibly hear all of them. So we have to build some filters to say, okay, well, if there's lots and lots and lots of packets coming from this place and going to that place, we'll represent it by one sound, but make that sound slightly different so that we can then hear that that sound represents more than just one packet.
What is the goal of the CORPO tool?
Well, the principal idea or the principal purpose behind building a tool like this is to try and understand something about the nature of the way data flows in the organization. Data represents activity. I send you an email, there's a reason behind it. I don't necessarily need to know the reason, but like when you listen, you don't need to know the reason, but there's the fact that there's an email that goes from my department to your department, and that it happens every hour, or it happens mainly on Mondays and hardly ever on Fridays, so forth. These are all things which can be represented in the sonification, and thus when we listen to the way the data is flowing, we get some sense of the activity of the organization. So for example, if there's a lot of email that goes between you and your colleagues in your department, and me and my colleagues in my department, but we don't have much email between the two departments, you get a sense that there's maybe a silo. There's two silos sitting there and they're not talking to each other very well. And from a management point of view, you might be interested in that. Then finding ways of encouraging this communication, and then you can test to see whether it works or not. That's a simple example of the use of the tool.
Okay. And in which ways artistic aspects have influenced the piece?
From an artistic perspective, we are exploring the tool. Creative play is very important. It's important for all of us in our scientific work as well as our creative work. Play is very important, and so art making is about not determining the outcome before you start the process. So when we start to work with the data, we start to build the tool, we start to say, what happens if we do this? What happens if we do that? Because we're not constrained by whether it's going to be effective or not. We can make mistakes. So art making, it gives you a freedom. And so this is the reason why it's very important. And of course, apart from all that, we like to have art. Art is a very important part of our lives. And revealing aspects of our lives is one of the things that art does. Art has always done revealing some aspect of our lives, whether it's a political structure that we're involved in, or things that we like or don't like, or all sorts of things. This is revealing something which is hidden. So we are, in art making, we are revealing something. So that's one of its functions.
What are the challenges of programming compositions by code, David?
That's a good question, because as a composer, I always compose by code. Unless I'm improvising, and then it's a sort of improvisation. Maybe the code is improvised. But to be slightly serious, the code gives you an abstraction. And as a composer, composers do this all the time. When we make a piece for symphony orchestra, we don't wake up in the middle of the night and have an idea and write it down on a notepad, and suddenly, mysteriously, 2 days later, the symphony orchestra is playing. That's not the way it is. As a composer, you put dots on paper, and you put more dots, and you put more dots, and you put more dots, and hundreds of thousands of dots, and it takes a long time. In that way, writing music or sonification by code is no different. It's slow, it's incremental, you make mistakes, you have to throw whole pages away, you have to do it again. The challenges are, maybe you can say the challenges are physical challenges. To have the discipline, that's a challenge, to have the discipline to work long hours. But as somebody who thinks in sound, there's nothing particularly different about writing in code than writing dots on paper, really. Well, I think of it as dots on paper. I hear off the page, a composer writing dots on a paper hears off the page in their mind. They don't need the sound in reality to do it. So it's not really all that different. Your question is really, what are the difficulties of writing music or writing sonification? Not necessarily with code, I think.
Okay, thank you. And were there any difficulties in the realization of the project for you personally?
Oh, it would be wrong to say it was all sunshine. No project is ever all sunshine. No. The challenge is not to find projects that have no difficulties. The challenge is always to find the difficulties and face them in a project. So this is a new project. Doing new projects is something that I happen to, maybe I'm bizarre, but I like new projects which are difficult. And it's always a challenge to do a new project. So in this example, the data itself, no one had ever looked at the data or observed the data coming through the system in the way we had to do for this project. So the IT department had big challenges, and they'd never examined the data like this before. And then you have the problem of, okay, we have some tools which we can observe the data. Now, how do we perceptualize that? Okay, turn the tap on and out comes the data, but there's too much data. What do you do? So the challenge is then to build a model that allows you to use the right sort of data at the right time. And we had to change the way that the data came to us. 4 times I had to rewrite the code before I even got anywhere near the idea of being able to perceptualize it. The data is the data, and we're not actually dealing with just the data, we're dealing with the information that the data carries, and we have to extract the information from the data. So we have to have the flow of data, because the information is in the flow, not just in the packets themselves. And so, yeah, first of all we had some difficulties because the tools were difficult. Then the second difficulty was that we had to protect an anonymity of the data, because of course you can't deal with people's personal data. We're not dealing with that. So what we had to do is the data has to go from here. It has to in fact go to Munich or München, and then it has to be filtered in a particular way so that it's anonymous. Then it has to come back, and it has to come through a pipe, so to speak, and then we have to deal with it. And we had lots of experiments. Do we come back through 30 pipes? Do we come back through one pipe? How do we do it? And we had to continue to rewrite the code. There's a dialogue between me and the IT people, and that was the biggest challenge. In the end, the biggest challenge is time, because as you know, we have an opening and we have an exhibition, and no matter how many mistakes, no matter how many problems we have along the way, the opening doesn't move. So you have to continually adjust everything that you can, including how many hours you sleep, in order to open.
Wow, that sounds enormous. And what is the current status of the tool, and how can it be improved?
I think of it as just a beginning. We've just started. I think these things are always slow to start. We find a lot of problems out. We now know how to deal with the data, how to get the data and have it stripped off the personal information, and have it flow into a machine that allows us to start the sonification, or to build a sonification model. We have a mechanism already to deal with the relationship between the visual domain and the oral domain, to how to send important information into the visual domain where we want to support the oral domain with the visual domain, and vice versa. So we've just started to do that. This is something that Fraunhofer doesn't do a lot of. A lot of Fraunhofer's work is analysis. It's pulling things apart. Maybe, unfortunately, actually it's the real world. Putting things together is not the same as the opposite of pulling things apart. So it's slow, because you have to put things together, and you have to see, observe how they go together, and then. So we've just started, and I think it has a very large potential for all sorts of reasons. We can, in fact, convey things that, as I said, we can't convey with the eye. And sound has a very sort of directness to people. I think we're touched by sound, and so people can understand something about the nature of what it is that you transmit through sound that you can't in some other way. When you combine it with the visual, where you have the ear helping the eye and the eye helping the ear, which is what happens in nature, right? I mean, we don't walk around with just our ears or just our eyes. When that happens, very interesting things can happen, because you observe things visually and then you hear them, and then you observe things orally and then you see them, and this builds a stronger idea of what it is that's going on. So I think it's just the beginning, and would be a very exciting project to take it further, because the tools, it takes a long time to build the tools, to get them right. You have to tune them, the tools, and we've just really started, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, David.
Good.